religious liberty is important, and I think there's a tension sometimes. Just last year we had legislation in this body that would have restricted what religious universities could do on their campuses, including telling them how they could order their married and single student housing, telling them what moral codes they could adopt and not adopt. Even the Reproductive Fact Act, which was mentioned before, tells purely private nonprofits, most of them faith-based, who they can refer their clients to, and forces them to refer their clients to people that they probably wouldn't agree with, right? So there's a tension here on religious liberty, and just as a Muslim registry I think would be a gross overreach into religious liberty, would not us in telling purely religious universities how they should conduct and implement their faith, act out their faith, or telling nonprofits who have very strong beliefs about abortion and how their faith interplays with that and helping women in troubled situations. Don't we also need to be cognizant of going too far into the religious liberties of those folks as well?
Yeah, no amendment is without some limitation. You can't yell fire in a movie theater. On religious protections, the protection for religion is for the individual. And so I think it's important to distinguish between protections that you're affording to the individual to exercise his or her religion freely versus protections you're giving to some institution or entity who's essentially bootstrapping the First Amendment protections on behalf of somebody else.
And the first is I pressed him on religious liberty. And I was very specific in my questioning. And his answer, we should all listen to what his answer was, because what he said was that with regard to religious protections, the protection is for the individual. And he went on to say that we have to distinguish between the individual and institutions and entities that bootstrap the First Amendment. Well, I take great issue with that statement, because it's a very fundamental misunderstanding of the freedom of religion and the freedom of association. And our number one constitutional officer, who's supposed to uphold the U.S. Constitution and who's supposed to uphold the California Constitution, should understand that. Because the freedom of religion in the First Amendment applies just as much to the mosque as it does to the Muslim. It applies just as much to the Gurdwara as it does to the Sikh. It applies just as much to the church as it does to the Christian. And that line of questioning shows me that he doesn't understand that. It applies just as much to religious nonprofits and universities and places of education. Their religious rights need to be protected just as much. And so that is very concerning for me.